dragged away from the gate for daring to sit in first class. She was mocked as a fraud in front of hundreds. Minutes later, when the pilot collapsed midair, 312 lives would depend on the very woman they had just humiliated. The hum of the airport was a strange kind of music, one built from rolling suitcases, scattered announcements over loudspeakers, the soft clatter of keyboards at check-in desks, and the nervous chatter of people about to fly across the country. Seattle International was crowded that morning, a tide of people in pressed suits, yoga pants, backpacks, and luxury handbags flowing through its vast terminal. Somewhere in the middle of that river of travelers stood Naomi Carter, dressed in nothing more than a pair of faded jeans, a simple cotton shirt, and sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back, neat but unstyled, and she carried a worn leather duffel on her shoulder. To any casual observer, she looked like an ordinary woman in her mid-30s, maybe a schoolteacher, maybe a nurse heading home after visiting family. Nothing in her appearance screamed wealth, power, or privilege. And in the world of airports, especially around the gleaming, exclusive space near the first-class gate, that absence of visible luxury was an invitation for judgment. "Get your hands off me!" Naomi's voice cut through the hum like a blade. Officer Brad Turner's fingers dug into her arm hard enough to leave red marks. He wasn't subtle. He wasn't polite. He gripped her as if she were a thief being dragged out of a store. Around them, passengers slowed, their curiosity piqued by the sight of a uniformed security officer manhandling a woman whose only crime so far appeared to be standing near the wrong door. "Ma'am, I said step aside. This gate is for first-class passengers only," Turner barked, his voice laced with the kind of disdain that made his meaning obvious. He wasn't enforcing procedure. He was enforcing his assumption of who belonged where. Naomi's breath came fast, not from fear. From rage she was working desperately to keep leashed. "I have a first-class ticket." She pulled the boarding pass from her bag and held it out, steady despite the ache in her wrist where his grip pressed bone against tendon. Turner barely glanced at it, giving the slip of paper less attention than someone would give a fast food receipt. His lip curled. "Yeah, right. And I'm the pilot." A chuckle rippled through the waiting area. A businessman in a tailored navy suit, his tie held with a gold pin, laughed loud enough for others to hear. "Security should check how she even afforded to be in this terminal," he jeered, his tone dripping with superiority. His name, Naomi would later learn, was Richard Harlow. At that moment, he was just another rich man with an expensive watch and a cruel smile. The humiliation burned Naomi from the inside out, like acid eating through steel. She had faced worse. Oh, she had faced far worse. But this was different. This was public. Dozens of eyes watched her, some curious, some eager for spectacle, some already lifting phones to capture the drama for social media. Turner tightened his grip, twisting her arm behind her back in a maneuver that was less about procedure and more about control. "Look, lady," he sneered, "I don't know how you got that fake ticket, but you're not getting on this plane. You're coming with me." Naomi's training stirred deep in her body. 15 years of combat aviation, hand-to-hand drills, survival exercises, hostage simulations. They had taught her how to break bones with a flick of her wrist. In 2 seconds, she could have reversed his hold, pinned him face first against the boarding gate, and left him begging for mercy. But this wasn't a battlefield. It was a terminal full of civilians. So she breathed, her voice sharp but controlled. "Sir, you're hurting me." "Good," Turner spat. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to scam your way onto flights you can't afford." The words struck harder than his grip. Scam. Can't afford. The accusation was the point. He wanted the watching crowd to believe she was a fraud, a cheat, an imposter sneaking into a world reserved for others. And that was when the loudspeaker crackled to life, its static, jagged voice echoing across the gate. "Attention passengers of Flight 447. We have a critical emergency. Captain Walker has collapsed. We need any military pilots to identify themselves immediately. The terminal stilled. The chuckles died in throats. The businessman's grin faltered. Every head turned toward the gate. Naomi's eyes locked with Turner's. She let her words fall into the silence like thunder. Colonel Naomi Carter, United States Air Force. She enunciated each syllable with deliberate precision. Then, colder. Now let go of me before 312 people die. For the first time, Turner's face drained of color. His grip loosened like he had touched fire. The woman he had been yanking around in front of 200 witnesses wasn't just a passenger. She was exactly the person the desperate voice on the loudspeaker was begging for. Naomi pulled her arm free with calm, deliberate force, rubbing the spot where his fingers had bruised her flesh. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Officer Turner," she said, reading his name tag with a calmness that felt like a knife in the silence. "You might want to call your supervisor. You just assaulted a decorated military officer in front of half this terminal." Odom, Lauren Peters, the gate agent, rushed forward. Her face was blotched red with embarrassment, her voice breathless. "Colonel Carter, I am so sorry. Please, the flight crew needs you immediately." Naomi gave her a professional nod. "Then let's go." But the damage was already done. The dozens of passengers who had pulled out their phones had captured every second. The sneer in Turner's voice, the disdain in his words, the cruel laughter of Richard Harlow. The entire waiting area had seen a black woman in jeans being dragged like a criminal for the crime of existing in first class. And now, they were watching her step into the role of savior. As Naomi walked down the jet bridge toward the aircraft, she heard Turner stammering into his radio. Control. I need backup at gate 23. We have a situation." He had no idea how right he was. The situation was about to become bigger than anything his small mind could comprehend. Because in the next hour, Colonel Naomi Carter would not only save hundreds of lives, but also rip the lid off a pattern of racial profiling at Seattle International that would shake the nation. Behind her, Richard Harlow shifted in his polished Italian loafers, suddenly uneasy. His wife, Evelyn, leaned toward him and whispered, "Richard, did that guard really just assault a colonel?" Richard forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to his own ears. "He probably didn't know who she was," he muttered, but the knot in his chest told him the truth. He had laughed at someone he should have been thanking. Flight 447, a gleaming Boeing 777 bound for Boston, loomed at the end of the jet bridge. Inside, business elites, politicians, and everyday travelers waited nervously for departure. None of their names or titles mattered anymore. The only name that mattered was the one Turner had spat on moments earlier. Naomi Carter. Naomi slid into seat 2A, her boarding pass validated without question now, though the irony twisted in her gut. She sank back, closed her eyes, and drew in a slow breath. She had endured prejudice her entire career. Each time, it stung. It didn't matter how many medals she wore, how many missions she flew, or how many times she proved herself. To some, her skin and her gender would always scream louder than her competence. And the irony gnawed at her. In less than 30 minutes, the same people who had just watched her drag like a thief would be depending on her to save their lives. Up in the cockpit, Captain James Walker had been at the controls when the crushing weight hit his chest. At 52 years old, with more than 2 decades of commercial flying under his belt, he had faced storms, engine failures, emergency landings. But nothing had prepared him for the freight train of a massive heart attack at 35,000 feet. His hands slipped from the controls as his body convulsed, monitors screaming alarms. Beside him, Ethan Reyes, barely 28 with 6 years of commercial experience but no combat training, felt terror, not his gut. "Mayday! Mayday!" His voice cracked into the radio, barely steady, as he fought to keep the massive jet level. "This is Flight 447. Captain Walker is unconscious. We need immediate assistance." The storm ahead was no ordinary turbulence. Satellite reports described it as unprecedented, hurricane-force winds, lightning that lit up the sky like artillery fire, and air currents that tossed the Boeing 777 as if it were a child's toy. Ethan had never flown solo in conditions like this. In truth, he had never flown solo in any serious conditions. And now, 312 lives depended on him. Back in the cabin, panic was spreading like wildfire. A baby cried uncontrollably as her mother clutched her close. Elderly passengers gripped armrests with white knuckles, lips moving in prayer. Executives who controlled billion-dollar empires sat powerless, realizing their money meant nothing against the wrath of the storm. Ethan's voice came over the intercom, thin and shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a severe medical emergency in the cockpit. I need immediate assistance from anyone with military aviation experience. Please identify yourselves." Naomi opened her eyes. She scanned the cabin, fear carved lines into every face, from the front of first class to the back of economy. And in the eyes of those who had watched her humiliation at the gate, she now saw desperation. Desperation for someone, anyone, to save them. Richard Harlow stood, puffing his chest with boardroom bravado. "Listen here," he bellowed, loud enough to command attention. "I've flown with private pilots for 2 decades. I have extensive experience with luxury aircraft. I can help this kid figure it out." A flight attendant, Robert Thompson, hurried over. His professional calm stretched thin. "Sir, we need someone with military flight training. Civilian experience, no matter how extensive, is not sufficient in these conditions." "Are you questioning my qualifications?" Richard snapped, his voice swelling with entitlement. "I didn't pay $18,000 for these seats just to have some kid crash us into the ocean because he's too inexperienced to handle a little weather." Naomi exhaled. The time for silence was over. She rose from her seat, her movement fluid, precise, the kind of precision born from training where hesitation meant death. She stepped into the aisle, every eye following her. "Excuse me," she said to Robert, her voice calm, steady, professional. "Colonel Naomi Carter, United States Air Force, 2,000 flight hours in F-22 Raptors, expert in emergency navigation and combat aviation. I can help." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the storm seemed to pause. Richard's mouth hung open, disbelief written across his face. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I respect the military, sure, but I'm not betting my life on some affirmative action fantasy. My wife and I paid a fortune to be here, not to let a fraud play dress up in the cockpit." Evelyn tugged at his sleeve. "Richard, stop. Please. She's trying to help." But Richard's prejudice was louder than reason. "Ridiculous. I'm trying to save our lives. Evelyn, I'm not trusting our safety to someone who was just being dragged out of the gate by security. Did you see what she was wearing? Does she look like a colonel to you?" The cruelty sliced through the cabin like a blade. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, shame creeping into their expressions. An elderly woman whispered to her neighbor, "She does look awfully young to be a colonel. Are we sure she's really qualified?" Naomi didn't flinch. She had heard it all before. Every variation of "you don't belong," every shade of disbelief, every excuse for why her competence was suspect when others was assumed. But the clock was ticking. Captain Walker's heart had stopped beating. A storm was tearing at their wings, and whether these passengers believed her or not, she was the only chance they had. Naomi Carter straightened her shoulders, her gaze fixed on the cockpit door ahead. It didn't matter who doubted her. It didn't matter who sneered, who whispered, who filmed. She knew the truth, and she was about to prove it. The storm outside was pounding against the fuselage with such force that the windows vibrated in their frames. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks, illuminating the cabin in strobe-like flashes that made every fearful face look like a frozen mask of dread. Somewhere behind the roar of the engines and the shrieking wind, Naomi Carter's steady footsteps cut down the aisle like drumbeats. Her presence shifted the air. Passengers who had just been whispering doubts and recording humiliation on their phones now leaned away, creating space for her to pass. Even those who doubted her couldn't help noticing the precision of her movement. She didn't stumble with the turbulence. She didn't sway like others did when the jet jolted. She walked like the aircraft belonged to her. Richard Harlow muttered from his seat, half to himself, half to anyone willing to hear. This is insane. She's not a real pilot. This is just theatrics. His voice dripped with desperation now, more defensive than confident. His wife, Evelyn, gave him a sharp look, but he avoided her eyes. Naomi reached the front of first class where Robert Thompson, the senior flight attendant, stood guard near the cockpit door. His uniform was pressed, his hair neatly combed, but his face was pale with fear. He looked at her like a man caught between hope and liability. "Mr. Thompson," Naomi said evenly, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had spoken in war rooms and briefing halls. "You don't have the luxury of hesitation? Let me in." "Now," Robert hesitated. He glanced back at the cockpit door where Ethan Reyes was fighting to control the aircraft. He glanced at Richard Harlow, whose money and arrogance had always carried weight in rooms like these. Then he looked back at Naomi. Jeans, sneakers, the faint red marks on her arm from Officer Turner's grip. His training screamed liability, but something in her eyes screamed competence. And then Naomi spoke again, softer but sharper. "I know the checklist for a Boeing 787 emergency descent. Do you?" Robert swallowed, his lips pressed together. Without another word, he swiped his access card and opened the cockpit door. Inside, chaos reigned. Ethan Reyes was drenched in sweat, his white shirt clinging to his back. His hands gripped the yoke with the desperation of someone clinging to a cliff edge. Alarms blared from every panel, warnings about altitude, turbulence, and autopilot disengagement. The massive aircraft was being tossed like a leaf in a hurricane, each jolt rattling teeth and sending unsecured items crashing across the floor. Captain James Walker lay slumped in his seat, his skin an ashen gray, his chest rising shallowly, if at all. Electrodes from the aircraft's emergency medical kit were attached to him, but the monitor showed a failing rhythm. A flight attendant knelt beside him, frantically attempting chest compressions in the cramped space. Ethan's eyes flicked to Naomi as she entered, wide with exhaustion and relief all at once. Please tell me you're the one they called for." "Colonel Naomi Carter, United States Air Force," she said crisply. 2,000 hours in F-22s, combat and emergency operations. Move over." For the first time in nearly 30 minutes of freefall chaos, Ethan exhaled. Thank God. He slid his chair back an inch, enough to let her sit in the co-pilot's seat. Before Naomi could strap in, Richard Harlow barged into the cockpit doorway, his voice booming with the same arrogance he carried into boardrooms. "Hold it right there. You can't just let her take over. This is madness. I've flown private jets across Europe and South America. I know emergency procedures. I know how to handle weather. If anyone's helping this kid, it's me." Naomi didn't turn to face him. She didn't even blink. Her hands were already moving across the panels, flipping switches, checking gauges, silencing non-critical alarms. "Ethan, current altitude and airspeed," she demanded. 37,000 feet, 480 knots, he said quickly. Naomi nodded. "Fuel? 18,000 pounds remaining." Richard stepped closer, his voice sharp with entitlement. "Are you seriously ignoring me? I said I have experience." Naomi cut him off without raising her voice. "Mr. Harlow, this is not a boardroom. I don't care about your investments. I care about aerodynamics, lift, drag, and thrust. Unless you can recite the emergency descent protocol for a Boeing 777 verbatim, sit down." Ethan blinked at her, stunned. "Colonel, those are exact procedures." "Of course they are," Naomi said. adjusting the autopilot settings with calm precision. Because I helped Boeing write them when I was assigned as a military liaison 5 years ago. Richard's face flushed red. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone can memorize a checklist. Naomi finally turned, her eyes locking onto his with a force that made him falter. Mr. Harlow, I'm not memorizing. I'm executing. You can leave or you can watch. Those are your only options. The jet lurched violently as a downdraft shoved it downward like a giant's hand. Passengers screamed from the cabin. Ethan fought the controls, but Naomi's hands shot out, steadying the yoke with practiced strength. The aircraft leveled, not perfectly, but enough to stop the freefall. Ethan's breath hitched. How did you? Naomi's eyes stayed on the instruments. You don't fight a storm like this. You dance with it. Feel the currents. Anticipate the rhythm. Every storm has a pattern. Find it, and you'll survive. The words were simple, almost poetic, but the truth behind them came from 15 years of threading fighter jets through missile fire and weather systems that should have killed her. Richard stood frozen, gripping the cockpit doorway with white knuckles. His arrogance was cracking under the weight of reality. For the first time, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a man realizing he was out of his depth. Behind them, Robert Thompson lingered, watching the exchange with growing awe. He had doubted her. He had assumed she didn't belong. But now, in the space of less than 2 minutes, she had brought order to chaos. Colonel, Ethan said, his voice steadier now, I'm officially requesting your assistance under Emergency Aviation Authority. Will you help me save this aircraft? Naomi nodded once, her hands already moving to adjust their descent. Strap in, Mr. Reyes. We're about to thread a needle the size of a hurricane. And with that, the cockpit shifted. The fear that had threatened to consume Ethan began to fade, replaced by something else. Trust. Naomi Carter was in command. The cockpit was vibrating under the storm's fury. Warning lights blinked across the instrument panels like frantic eyes, alarms wailing their mechanical chorus. The storm outside slammed at the fuselage in waves, the kind of turbulence that felt like invisible fists pounding against the metal skin of the aircraft. Naomi Carter strapped herself fully into the co-pilot's seat, her fingers flying over switches and levers with a confidence that looked almost unreal. To Ethan Reyes, she was no longer just a passenger. She was something else entirely, a calm center in the eye of chaos. Colonel, Ethan said, glancing sideways at her, what's the first move? Stabilize descent, Naomi replied without hesitation. Autopilot's compromised in these wind shears. Disconnect it. We go manual. Ethan's eyes widened. Manual? In this weather? Exactly in this weather, Naomi countered. Autopilot algorithms weren't designed for combat turbulence. But I was. Her hand reached out, and with a sharp click, the autopilot disengaged. The yoke jolted as the plane reminded them of its weight, its hunger to drop. Ethan grabbed his controls instinctively. Naomi's voice sliced through his panic. Ease into it. Don't fight the storm. Feel it. When it pulls, you redirect. When it drops, you cushion. The plane shuddered as if testing her words. Naomi moved the yoke with small, deliberate corrections, her eyes reading the altimeter, the horizon indicator, the thrust gauges, and the storm's rhythm outside the windows all at once. To her, it was music. To Ethan, it was madness. Behind them, Richard Harlow refused to stay silent. His voice rose like a sour note in the symphony of alarms. This is reckless. You're going to get us all killed. Kid, listen to me, he barked at Ethan. I've flown through storms before. You need altitude. Take this bird up to 42,000. Clear the storm. Ethan flinched, uncertain. He looked between the billionaire with a booming voice and the colonel who sat calm as stone. Colonel? Higher altitude? Naomi didn't look at Richard. She didn't waste the breath. If we climb heavy in this turbulence, the wings will shear off before we hit 41. Structural failure. Fatal in less than 60 seconds. What we need is a controlled descent. Richard scoffed, loud enough to drown a warning tone. Descent? Are you insane? You're flying us into the storm. That was the moment Naomi turned, her eyes locking with his. The lightning outside illuminated her face like a flashbulb, her expression carved from steel. Mr. Harlow, she said evenly, you're confusing volume for authority. Let me be clear. Altitude is death. Descent is survival. Those are the facts. This isn't a yacht in a boardroom argument. This is combat math. And I don't lose when lives are on the line. Ethan swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling as the truth of her words settled in. For the first time, he looked past Richard's money and Naomi's jeans. He looked at competence. Colonel Carter, he said firmly, I'm with you. Richard sputtered. You're making a mistake. Son, she doesn't belong here. Look at her. Naomi cut him off, her voice razor sharp. You're right. I don't belong here. I belong in a fighter jet at Mach 2, but today I'm exactly where 312 people need me to be, and nothing you say changes that. The aircraft jolted violently, dropping nearly 500 feet in a single heartbeat. Screams erupted from the cabin behind them. Ethan's hands tightened on the yoke, his knuckles whitening. Naomi's hand overlapped his briefly, steadying his movement. Trust the rhythm, she said softly. Watch. Her hands guided the yoke through a subtle adjustment, not resisting the drop but curving with it, bleeding momentum into forward thrust instead of a plunge. The plane steadied, leveling at 35,000 feet. The alarms quieted one by one. Ethan stared at her like she was rewriting the laws of physics. How did you know? Naomi gave a faint smile, though her eyes stayed locked on the storm. 15 years in combat zones. You learn the difference between fighting air and dancing with it. Robert Thompson, still hovering near the doorway, whispered, She's not even breaking a sweat. Richard's face was crimson now, his arrogance crumbling into desperation. This is insanity. I won't sit here and watch some DEI higher experiment with my life. Do you hear me? Naomi didn't flinch. Her voice dropped lower, quieter, carrying more weight than any shout. Mr. Harlow, your comments, your insults, your arrogance, they're all being recorded on this cockpit's voice recorder. When we land, and we will land, those words will be played in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in newsrooms. So before you say another thing, consider whether you want the world to hear it. For the first time, Richard went silent, his lips pressed together, but his eyes still burned with resentment. Naomi ignored him. Her attention returned fully to Ethan. We're descending to find stable air, but we're going to need more than instruments. Contact Seattle ATC. Tell them I need a direct line to McCord Air Force Base. Ethan blinked. The military? Yes. What I'm about to attempt has never been done in a commercial aircraft. I need real-time satellite weather data. McCord has the satellites. They'll give me the eyes we need. Ethan nodded quickly and grabbed the radio. Seattle Control, this is Flight 447 declaring emergency. Request immediate connection with McCord Air Force Base operations. The response came swift, tense. Flight 447, copy emergency, patching you through to McCord. Stand by. Static hissed. Then a new voice cut through, crisp and commanding. Flight 447, this is Colonel Patricia Hayes. McCord operations, identify the military personnel requesting assistance. Naomi took the radio without hesitation. Colonel Naomi Carter, call sign Spectre, requesting real-time satellite weather data to navigate storm penetration. The silence that followed was brief but electric. Then Hayes's voice returned, sharper now, tinged with relief. Spectre, we confirm your identity. You're cleared for full support. The Secretary of Defense is monitoring your situation personally. You have absolute priority. Ethan turned to her, eyes wide. Colonel, who exactly are you? Naomi didn't look away from the storm. Her hands danced over the controls with precision that seemed almost supernatural. I'm someone who spent 15 years bringing people home alive from impossible skies. Today, that includes you. Outside the windows, the storm flared with another lightning strike, the sky momentarily white as bone. Inside the cockpit, though, there was a shift. Panic gave way to purpose. Naomi Carter was flying now, and for the first time since Captain Walker's heart gave out, survival felt possible. The cockpit lights glowed an eerie red as the Boeing 777 plunged into the heart of the storm. Lightning forked around them like the claws of some vast, invisible predator. Rain hammered the fuselage so hard it sounded like machine gun fire. The aircraft jolted, shuddered, and groaned under the forces ripping at its wings. But Naomi Carter's voice cut through the chaos like steel through cloth. Ethan, confirmed descent rate. We on him, 4,000 feet per minute, holding, he stammered, sweat dripping down his temples. Good. Keep it steady. Adjust thrust to idle. Speed brakes extended. We're bleeding altitude deliberately. Don't fight it. The alarm screamed warnings. Overspeed. Altitude. Turbulence. Naomi silenced the non-critical ones, her fingers flicking switches with surgical precision. Her voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. Noise is the enemy. Mr. Reyes, focus on the essential. Ignore the rest. Behind them, Richard Harlow gripped the doorway so tightly the veins in his hands bulged. You're going to tear this plane apart. You're not a magician. Colonel, you're gambling with 300 lives. Naomi didn't look back. Her eyes stayed on the instruments, her hands on the yoke, her voice calm. This isn't gambling, Mr. Harlow. It's mathematics. Every storm has a rhythm, and right now I'm playing it like a symphony. The aircraft plunged again, a violent drop that sent food trays and luggage crashing. Screams erupted from the cabin. A child cried out, "Mommy!" Robert Thompson, still near the cockpit, whispered under his breath, "God help us." But Naomi's hands moved like a pianist's, coaxing the massive jet through invisible air currents as though she could see what no one else could. She used the updrafts like waves, surfing them to regain lift. She rolled slightly into downdrafts, letting the storm's own violence stabilize their descent. Ethan glanced at her in disbelief. "Colonel, how are you calculating these turns without the computer?" Naomi's mouth curved into the faintest smile. 10,000 hours of combat flight time. When you've flown through missile fire with one engine flaming, you learn to read the air like sheet music. Every gust, every pocket, it's telling you a story. Seattle Control crackled over the radio. Flight 447, storm intensity is at record levels. Recommend diversion. Naomi cut them off. Negative. Diversion is impossible in this corridor. We thread through, or we don't come out at all. McCord, I need southern wall coordinates now. Colonel Hayes' voice came back steady. Professional. Spectre. Satellite feed shows eye wall 40 nautical miles southwest. Wind shear exceeds 150 knots. Protocol recommends avoiding penetration. Naomi's voice carried the weight of someone who had broken protocols before and lived to tell the tale. Protocols are for conventional weather. This isn't conventional. Upload data. I'll improvise. Hayes' voice softened, tinged with awe. Understood. Spectre. Transmitting now. Godspeed. Richard barked bitterly. Improvising. She admits it. She's experimenting with our lives. Naomi finally turned, her gaze slicing into him with such force that his words died in his throat. Mr. Harlow, I'm not experimenting. I'm surviving. The difference is, survival works. Ethan almost laughed despite the terror, because she sounded so sure, so utterly unshakable, that he believed her even as lightning lit up the sky in a furious white blaze. The aircraft dropped again, harder this time. Oxygen masks swung wildly from the ceiling. A woman's voice wailed from the cabin. "We're going to die!" Naomi seized the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, This is Colonel Naomi Carter. We are navigating severe conditions, but we are in control. I need you to remain calm. This will feel like crashing, but it's not. It's precision, it's survival, and I promise you, this storm will not win. The tone in her voice, calm, firm, maternal yet commanding, rippled through the cabin. The panic didn't vanish, but it quieted. Some passengers unclenched their fists. Others held hands tighter. For the first time since the emergency began, hope seeped back into their eyes. Back in the cockpit, Naomi's body moved in rhythm with the storm, tilting the yoke at impossible angles, throttling down, then punching thrust at exactly the right moments. Ethan's eyes darted across gauges, struggling to keep up. "Colonel, how are you even—" "Stop thinking like a civilian pilot," Naomi said firmly. "Stop fighting the storm. Feel its timing. It's not chaos, it's rhythm." As if to prove her point, the aircraft slipped between two thunderheads that should have torn them apart. Instead, Naomi guided them through a narrow corridor of relative calm, a tunnel of safety no radar could have predicted. Lightning flashed on either side, but the plane held steady. Ethan's jaw dropped. That was impossible." Naomi shook her head. "No, just improbable. Impossible is a word people use when they stop trying." Richard's voice, smaller now, broke the silence. "Colonel," his arrogance was gone, replaced by something closer to pleading. I owe you an apology." Naomi didn't take her eyes off the instruments. "Save it for when we're on the ground. Mr. Harlow, right now, I need you silent." And for the first time since boarding, Richard obeyed. Minutes crawled by like hours. Naomi threaded the massive aircraft through a gauntlet of fury, surfing the storm's violence the way only someone who had danced with death in combat skies could. Ethan followed her lead, his hands steadier now, his breathing syncing with hers. For the first time in his career, he was learning what it meant to fly not by numbers alone, but by instinct sharpened to a blade's edge. Finally, Colonel Hayes's voice came through again, clipped but reverent. "Spectre, satellite shows you're clear of the southern wall in 8 minutes. Your trajectory is holding. Seattle emergency crews are on full standby." Naomi exhaled, her focus never wavering. "Copy. 8 minutes until sunlight. 8 minutes until either survival or destruction." She glanced once at Ethan. "Mr. Reyes, stay with me. This is going to get worse before it gets better." Ethan nodded, his fear tempered by trust. "Yes, Colonel." And so they flew, not against the storm, but with it. Two pilots bound by necessity, one billionaire silenced by humility. 312 souls suspended in the hands of a woman who had been told her whole life that she didn't belong. But Naomi Carter belonged here, in this moment, in this storm, because only she could turn chaos into choreography. Only she could make the impossible look inevitable. And the storm, for all its fury, was beginning to yield. The southern wall of the storm loomed before them, a churning barricade of black clouds and white lightning. To the passengers in the cabin, it looked like the end of the world. To Naomi Carter, it looked like a final challenge. "Altitude?" she demanded. 10,000 feet and dropping," Ethan Reyes replied, his voice steadier than it had been all night. "Good. Prepare for combat descent." Ethan blinked. "Combat descent?" Naomi's eyes didn't leave the horizon. "It's going to feel like we're falling out of the sky, but it's controlled. It's the only way through this wall." Richard Harlow whimpered something under his breath, clutching the doorway like a man awaiting execution. Evelyn put a hand on his arm, whispering, "Richard, let her do this. Please." Naomi pushed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Colonel Carter. We are about to descend rapidly through the storm's wall. This will not feel like a normal landing. It will feel violent, but it is intentional. Breathe, hold tight, and trust me." In the cabin, silence fell. Some passengers clasped hands. Others whispered prayers. Others pressed their foreheads to the seat in front of them. But all of them listened. Her voice, calm and steady, became an anchor in their terror. Naomi's hands moved with certainty. Ethan, auto throttle disengaged. Flaps 15. Target speed, 180 knots. He obeyed instantly. Auto throttle off. Flaps 15. Speed 180 locked. The Boeing 777 tilted downward at an angle that made passengers scream. Oxygen masks swung wildly. Drinks spilled across the cabin floor. But Naomi's eyes stayed cold and calculating. Every movement a line in a dance only she could hear. Lightning flashed again, striking the left wing with a blinding glare. The plane shuddered violently. Richard shouted, "We've been hit!" Naomi's voice was iron. "Lightning doesn't down commercial aircraft. Stop panicking." The descent accelerated, 6,000 feet per minute, then 7. Alarms wailed. The aircraft groaned like a beast under strain. But Naomi's hands were steady, coaxing, guiding, demanding obedience from the storm itself. "Ethan, spoilers on my command," she said. "Reverse thrust the instant main gear touches, not before, not after, exactly when I call it." "Yes, Colonel," he said, his knuckles white on the throttle. Seattle Tower's voice crackled. "Flight 447, you are cleared for runway 16. Winds gusting 125 knots crosswind. Emergency crews in position every 500 feet. Good luck." Naomi pressed the transmitter. "Luck is for gamblers. This is skill." The passengers felt the ground racing up toward them, faster than any descent they had ever known. The windows showed nothing but sheets of rain and slashing light. A businessman sobbed openly. A little girl whispered, "Mommy, is she really going to save us?" Her mother clutched her close. "Yes, baby, she is." At 2,000 feet, the turbulence reached its peak. The aircraft bucked like a wild animal, yawing hard left, then snapping back right. Ethan's instincts screamed to overcorrect, but Naomi's calm voice stopped him. "Steady hands, Mr. Rhea, trust the rhythm." And then it happened. Through sheer force of will and mastery, Naomi aligned 200 tons of machinery with a runway she couldn't even see yet. The ground radar confirmed what her instincts already knew. They were on target. 1,000 feet, Ethan called out. "Brace," Naomi commanded. The aircraft roared downward, rain slamming against the cockpit glass. The runway lights finally pierced the storm, a glowing thread of salvation. 200 feet, Naomi's voice was calm. "Hold, hold." The wheels smashed into the runway with a controlled violence that rattled every bolt. "Now," she barked. Ethan slammed the spoilers and thrust reversers into position. The engines roared in reverse, a sound like thunder harnessed. The aircraft decelerated brutally, the cabin jolting forward, seatbelts straining against bodies. Fire trucks and ambulances raced alongside, their lights painting the storm red and blue. 70 knots, 50, 30, Ethan called, breathless. And then, silence. The Boeing 777 rolled to a stop. For a moment, the cabin was frozen in disbelief, and then applause erupted like a tidal wave. People cried, people laughed, people clapped until their hands were raw. A man shouted, "She saved us!" Someone else sobbed, "Thank you. God, thank you." Naomi exhaled slowly, her first real release of tension since stepping into the cockpit. She set the parking brake, powered down the throttles, and whispered, "Welcome to Seattle." Ethan stared at her, his face pale but his eyes shining with awe. "Colonel, that was impossible." Naomi shook her head. "Impossible is a word people use when they've given up. We didn't give up." Behind them, Richard Harlow finally let go of the doorway. His hands trembled, his face ashen. He swallowed hard, then stepped forward. "Colonel Carter," he said, voice hoarse, I need to say this, in front of everyone. I was wrong. I judged you by your clothes, By your skin? By my own arrogance? I doubted your competence because I couldn't imagine someone like you in control, and you just saved my life. You saved my wife's life. You saved all of us." Naomi looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Harlow, acknowledgement is a start, but acknowledgement doesn't erase the system that taught you to doubt me in the first place." Richard's shoulders sagged. Evelyn touched his arm softly, whispering, "Listen to her." Paramedics stormed the cockpit to rush Captain Walker to the waiting ambulance. Dr. Sarah Johnson, the cardiologist passenger, followed them out. Ethan leaned back, whispering, "Colonel, if you hadn't been here." Naomi cut him off gently. "I was here. That's all that matters." 6 months later, the marble halls of the Senate echoed with footsteps as cameras clicked and whispered voices filled the chamber. Colonel Naomi Carter stood at the podium of the Armed Services Committee, her dress blues sharp, her medals gleaming. Reporters crowded the back rows, their lenses fixed on the woman who had pulled off the impossible landing of Flight 447. "Senators," she began, her voice calm but carrying weight. "What happened that night was not just an aviation emergency. It was the result of systemic bias. Had I been prevented from boarding, had my qualifications been dismissed, 312 lives would have been lost." Senator Patricia Williams leaned forward. "Colonel Carter, what reforms do you recommend?" Naomi's eyes swept the chamber. "Mandatory bias recognition training for all security personnel, accountability systems to track patterns of misconduct, and promotion practices based on proven competence, not assumptions about who looks the part." Her words rang out like a challenge to the entire nation. In the gallery, Richard Harlow sat quietly, no longer the booming businessman. His company had lost contracts after his remarks went viral, but he had turned his resources toward funding scholarships for underrepresented aviation students. He listened now, not with arrogance, but with humility. After the hearing, he approached Naomi in the corridor. "Colonel, I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying to be better. I've started programs. I've spoken with CEOs. I want to help." Naomi studied him for a long moment. His arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like sincerity. She gave a short nod. "Discomfort is the price of growth. Mr. Harlow, don't stop paying it." He nodded, eyes wet. "I won't." That evening, Naomi stepped outside into the crisp Washington air. The Capitol dome gleamed behind her. Her phone buzzed with a message from her commanding officer. "Spectre, new assignment. Lead the Air Force's Inclusion Initiative." "Interested?" she typed back. "Affirmative. Let's change some minds." Naomi Carter walked down the steps knowing one truth more than any other. Excellence does not need permission to exist. It only needs courage to persist until the world can no longer deny it. If this story moved you, if it made you think about who we judge, who we trust, and who we underestimate, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, challenge your own assumptions. And if you believe courage can change the course of lives, hit like, subscribe, and join us for more stories where truth and justice take flight.